The Human Resources Appointments and Equity Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, April the 3rd. Council Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Calling the roll, Ms. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Miller. Here. Ms. Conwell. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Do we have any public comment related to the agenda?
Yes, Reverend Pinckney Butts.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. All right, that's what I'm talking about. Everybody in the room, good morning. Resolution 2018-69, I want to confirm and also state that I agree with Brad Sellers. Brad, we've been through some stuff together over the years. You got a good man on that commission. And if he needs me to work with him on doing some things, we're FFL from the back in the day. And if it's something I can work with you all to help him make that progressive, I will be able to do so and willing to do so. And in Brad, Mayor Sellers, because it doesn't have mayor in here, of Warrensville Heights, Ohio, which is also my native territory, some of my native territory. My dad was council president in Warrensville Heights, Ohio in the 60s. In your Chagrin Southeast Region Planning Commission, please don't forget the transportation process out there and safety, public and private safety. For Resolution 2018-0070, the Community-Based Correctional Facility Governing Board, I'm interested in, even I can't sit on that, recommending some other clergy that would be capable to be a part of that process. And I like for, as Isaiah said in the first chapter in the 18th verse, come let us reason together. Though there are some mistakes in the process, I would like to be heard in reference to some corrections that can be made in the correctional area. And for Resolution 75, the resolution amending the Cuyahoga County travel policy, and the key point that sticks out with me is form of government. I realize you are doing some restructuring in that area on safety and other areas of Cuyahoga County travel policies. If I may be of a voice in that process, I am interested. And I will be back for non-agenda items to discuss other matters with you. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
No, no one else has signed in.
Okay, I'd also like to acknowledge my constituent, Mr. AJ is in the house today watching, and we're always pleased to have the youth involved in our political arena, so thank you for coming out today. All right, so we have our minutes before us. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from March 20th. Do we have a second? It's been moved and seconded. If there are no questions, comments, or concerns regarding the minutes, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, and I'll turn it over to you to read the first item into the record.
Resolution number 2018-0069, confirming the county executive's reappointment of the Honorable Bradley D. Sellers to serve on the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, representing the Chagrin Southeast Region for an unexpired term ending 12/31/2020.
All right, thank you so much. And if there's someone here to speak to this item, and if you'll please state your name and your affiliation for the record. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Glenn Coyne, Executive Director, Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. I'm here to answer any questions if you have any, but we agree with the executive's recommendation to reappoint Mayor Sellers to the Planning Commission. He has served already one 3-year term, which expired, and has been a fantastic member of our board, has been in attendance at almost all the meetings. And again, he is one of 8 chief elected officials throughout the county that sits on our board, along with 2 of your own and another county executive appointment as well. That makes our 11. So we are very much in support of the recommendation for the reappointment of Mayor Sellers to the board.
Thank you much, Mr. Coyne. I also echo those sentiments. It is an honor and a privilege to work with naturally one of my own from my district, Mayor Bartley Sellers. To your credit, he brings a wealth of experience as well as having an economic development background, so his knowledge suits the Planning Commission very well. And I am confident that he will continue to serve in the manner in which he has already, and so I certainly would like to add my recommendation as well. And if you would also add my name to this, I'll move this before the full body of the council. We have a meeting Thursday. Does this need to?
Next week on the 12th, we have
Yeah.
a meeting.
Does this need to go second reading?
Technically, no.
Technically.
Our bylaws allow him to serve until
Okay.
replaced, so there's no
All right,
rush.
excellent. So we'll just move this before the full body of the council under 3 readings. I'll make the motion. I've made the motion. Is there a second? Any questions, comments, or concerns? There being none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, this will
Thank you
move to
very
the full
much.
body of the council. Good to see you. Thank you so much. And Council Clerk, will you read the next item?
Resolution number 2018-0070, confirming the county executive's appointment of Scott Osicki to serve on the Cuyahoga County Community-Based Correctional Facility Governing Board for an unexpired term ending 12/31/2018.
All right, thank you so much. Please step forward, state your name for the record.
Good morning. I'm Ken Mills, the Director of Regional Corrections. Request confirmation of Scott for position to serve on the governing board for the CBCF. I think you'll find in his resume or his bio that his experience with the mental health and addiction services make him an ideal candidate for this position.
And would he like to say some words on his own behalf today?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. If you'll please step forward, state your name for the record, and share with us why you would like to be appointed to this body.
Okay, yes, good morning, Committee Chair Brown, Vice Chair Gallagher, committee members Jones, Miller, and Conwell. As you know, I'm Scott Osicki, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County. And thank you for considering my confirmation of being appointed to serve on the Facility Governing Board of the CBCF. I understand that this appointment is fulfilling an unexpired term of our former Adams Board CEOs and ends on December 31st, and it would be an honor for me to serve. As you probably are aware, that my first official day of CEO of the Adams Board was on March 1st. However, I've been with the board for nearly 24 years in various capacities. And prior to being selected as CEO, I was appointed as the acting CEO while maintaining my duties as the Chief of External Affairs on January 10th, following the untimely death of Valeria Harper. As Chief Executive Officer, I am charged with leading and overseeing the staff of the board and responsible for advocacy, planning, and management of a recovery-oriented system of care that delivers quality mental health and addiction treatment and recovery services through our contract agencies. The mission of the board is to enhance the quality of life for our community through a commitment to excellence in mental health and addiction prevention, treatment, and recovery services coordinated through a person-centered network of community supports. A part of the CBCF's mission is to provide education with respect to drugs, alcohol, and mental health as needed to improve the prisoner's chances for successful and law-abiding re-entry into the community. I want to serve on the CBCF Facility Governing Board to uphold both of these missions and ensure that mental health and addiction treatment is offered and provided to the men in the facility. This is important as many individuals living with mental illness or addictions end up within the prison system. The CBCF provides an excellent opportunity for people with mental illness and or addictions to be diverted from prison, stay near their families, and receive the services and skills needed to successfully re-enter the community. I feel that my leadership background, being responsible for public relations, media relations, governmental affairs, education and training, client rights at the board, as well as years of learning the mental health and addiction system in our community and working closely with Mr. Denahan for over 15 years, has prepared me to serve on the CBCF board. I know that this is a community, I know also that there's a community outreach subcommittee, which I'm also interested in being a part of. I have a bachelor's degree in communication from Cleveland State and have had several leadership positions in the communication, public relations, nonprofit, and government fields, such as communications manager with the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority, PR and communication consultant with Progressive Insurance, public relations manager for the former Cuyahoga County Community Mental Health Board, PR and fundraising coordinator for the Interchurch Council Hunger Work Director of PR at the Eliza Jennings Home, and Public Affairs and Fraternal Activities Director for the Catholic Knights of Ohio. I'm also a graduate of the Cleveland State University Leadership Academy, Class 13, and served as their past Secretary, Treasurer, Vice President, and President of their board. I also hold a Camel Belt attained by participating in Cleveland State University's Lean Ohio Boot Camp. So once again, I know that my years of government, leadership, mental health, and addiction system experience, as well as my current role as the CEO, would be beneficial to the operation of the CBCF and the people it serves, and I would be honored to be a member of the Facility Governing Board.
Thank you very much. I'll open up the floor to my colleagues for any questions that they may have.
Through the chair to Mr. Osiki, you are replacing who on the board?
William Denahan is still listed as the member, and I believe that, right, that Valerie Harper never had the chance to be appointed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. First of all, I want to thank you for your willingness to serve in this capacity and becoming the CEO. I want to congratulate you on that. I know it is a very heavy lift and a challenging role, but your willingness to serve and the knowledge and experience that you bring is a tremendous value. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, comments, or concerns. Oh, yes, Councilman Miller.
I just want to say how good it was to see someone who started at the bottom and worked up for years and years and worked up the organization and achieve the top spot as opposed to someone being brought in from the outside who didn't know our community and is starting from scratch. It's good to see that and wish you congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Miller.
Thank you. And I guess the other thing that I would ask respectfully, with regards to clergy, are there any members of clergy within this body?
Councilwoman Brown, I am not sure of that.
Okay.
You know, I know that our Adams Board has member of the clergy on that.
All right. That might be something we want to look into. Okay. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, comments, or concerns, the Councilwoman Conwell would like her name added. Any others?
You can add mine as well.
Councilman Jones, Miller, Gallagher, the whole committee.
Thank you.
All right. And I'll make the motion to move this to the full body of the council. Do we need this under second reading suspension, Mr. Mills or Mr. Oseki?
Sorry for walking away, ma'am.
That's okay. That's okay.
There is a meeting coming up next Thursday because they meet on the second Thursday or Friday of every month. So even if it would not be officially appointed, may I still attend that meeting?
I would imagine that I'll yield to Mr. Mills on that one.
There's no reason to have this second reading approval, but I think that you should be able to attend the meeting. We'll have to find that out.
Okay, so what I'm guessing based on my predecessor, Councilwoman Conwell, is that you would be able to attend the meeting, but you might not have voting authority. So our meetings are open to the public, and I'm imagining this is one. So you would actually be fine to attend, unable to vote, but we will move this under second reading suspension so that you will be able to exercise your voting authority at the next meeting.
Okay.
All right?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to move this under second reading suspension to the next meeting. There's been moved in second. If there are no questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, this moves to the full body of the council under second reading suspension. If you'll read the final item into the record, please.
Resolution number 2018-0075, amending the Cuyahoga County travel policy by updating the language and policies to conform with the current form of government.
All right, Mr. Kennedy, if you'll just state your name and what it is we have before us this morning.
My name is Dennis Kennedy. I'm the fiscal officer for the county, and what the committee has before it today is a draft of an updated travel policy for the county. It's kind of a historic day because we haven't updated this policy since 2007. From my standpoint, we have a concern that we complete this particular project. It has been a recommendation of the state auditors for a number of years, probably 6 or 7 years, that the county update their travel policy to not only make it more current with reimbursement rates, but also to add additional controls. I would, before we start discussing the actual policy itself, like to thank the council staff for their work on this. We've been working over the past year, various iterations of this draft. But the committee members should know that the council staff played a huge role in getting this done. I would also like to tell you that we also had the internal audit department review this proposed draft document. And this version that is in front of you now represents the changes that were recommended by both the council staff and internal audit. So we're pleased we've gotten this far. What I'd like to do is just give you a summary of changes, things that are important related to the policy as opposed to the current policy that's in effect that has been such since 2007. First, this policy will require specific itemized receipts for meals. That is contrary to the current policy, which was paid on a per diem rate or eligible for a per diem rate. We are going to track expenses much more closely than in the past, and we will have specific itemized receipts that will be subject to review before they are paid. All travel requests need to be approved by the appropriate department heads and the required system approvers prior to travel. Doing so will eliminate the need that was incorporated into the prior policy that referenced the Board of Commissioners to approve. This policy has been updated so it can be consistent with our on-base system, which is used to process all travel requests. So all that information will be entered into that system and be carried through the approval process in terms of a workflow as to where it goes and who signs off on it. So we'll make sure before we confirm that some travel expense can be incurred, that all those steps are followed. This, again, the travel requests must be processed through the respective travel request system, that's on-base. And if that changes through the ERP, we will amend the policy to be more specific with the ERP. We're hoping that there's an expense management module in the ERP system. And although we haven't gotten to the point where that's been fully developed, we're hopeful that that can take the place of the on-base system right now that's used to submit travel requests and then to process the reimbursements. The per diem limit amounts will be divided into two categories: regular locations, that's not to exceed $50, and premium price locations, that's not to exceed $60. There will no longer be the need to request based on specific destination. In the past, we referenced the travel according to either GSA or IRS guidelines in terms of what city you were going to. We're just going to put these two different caps in there. There is an addendum that lists the premium locations that folks travel to that would make them eligible for a different level of expense. So obviously, if you go to New York City, it's going to be a little more costly than if you go to Toledo. So we're hopeful, and again, everybody's looked at that, we're hopeful that this will address that situation.
Can we ask questions, Madam Chair, on points? So, through the chair, who orders the ticket? Will that be left up to the actual employee traveling, or is there going to be a system where the manager has to do that? Because I was reading the policy and it kind of states, when you can, to get the best and price for a ticket, there are certain guidelines that have to be met. So is that going to be left up to the employee who's actually traveling, or will that be the manager of the department or the department head?
Ms. Conwell, are you referring to like airline tickets?
Yes.
We have a travel agency that we will get a discounted price on. So without some kind of super exception, we're going to route everything through that travel agency so that we can get the best price. And we can also, they also have a pretty substantial reporting system in place so that we can track the expenses and make sure that for whatever purpose was originally proposed, that's the actual ticket.
So when you talk about who is the who? Who is
That'll be
gonna
done,
se-
it'll be arranged by the department heads in coordination with the fiscal office.
Okay, so when we're looking at the budget, we will talk directly to you about any issues that we would find. So you're saying the department heads would make the initial travel, but they have to coordinate that through you as well, so you're aware?
Yes.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, we're going to require that specific itemized receipts be produced in order to be eligible for reimbursements. There will be no payments made on summary receipts. I'm sure everybody's been out to a location with a credit card and you get an itemized receipt that shows everything that was paid for, and then you get a summary. In the past, some of those summary receipts have been submitted and paid. We're going to make those ineligible. You have to have the itemization to show what exactly you spent the money on. Reimbursement for any respective requests will not be made if the travel or training is not fully and satisfactorily completed. So that if somebody's going to a conference, if somebody's scheduling some kind of training, whether that would be to produce some type of certification, if the training or the conference is not completed, then the reimbursements will not be issued. We want to make sure that whatever anybody's proposing to do, that they live up to. And, that has been something that's been mentioned in prior year audit reports, so we're hopeful that this will address that particular situation. Any approval requests made after the respective travel are required to be approved by the fiscal office, either myself or a designee. There are going to be cases because of emergency situations, particularly in children's services. We're asking for, based on the revised policy, that everybody request the travel and get approved in advance. That's another recommendation that came out of the audit report. If it's important enough for somebody to go, they're going to have to take care of everything that's related to the purchase ahead of time. In the event there are situations that occur that prohibited that because of some type of emergency, hopefully those are limited. Those will go through a separate review and they will have to be approved by myself or a designee in the fiscal office.
Excuse me, go ahead, Councilwoman Conwell.
The reimbursements, is that in an allotted time period that they have to turn that in?
We're proposing
is that
30
stated?
days.
Okay.
So I just want to be clear, as it relates to emergency situations where I know Children and Family Services have to go sometimes across county lines and sometimes even state lines to provide the children in adequate shelter. How is that going to be affected by these new travel policies?
It should not, as long as it's planned in advance. But as I said, there is the likelihood at some point you'll have an emergency situation that could happen with the sheriff's office, with security. Those situations, I just want to make clear that those situations are going to be then independently reviewed to make sure they're after the fact. We want to make sure that everything was done correctly. We don't want to replicate the problems that we've had in the past with people setting up their travel and not telling us about it or getting approvals until months after the trip has occurred, because then it's too late for us to do anything about it. So in those specific emergency situations, those will be looked at individually, separately, to make sure that the trip was justified and we're in compliance. But other than that, you would have to submit your documents ahead of time.
Okay, so would it be safe to say that these travel policies are more focused on more focused on situations where they're planned travel for conferences and things of that nature?
In general, yes.
Okay, generally speaking.
Yes.
Councilman Miller, I see you chomping at the bit. Go ahead.
Director, do we have any idea how many travel reimbursement requests we process in a year?
Councilman, it's tough to quantify that because our current accounting system does not separate issues related to travel, for example, lodging expense, mileage expense, conference expense. I do know the number's fairly substantial. I mean, the total countywide that we spend on travel is somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million, depending on the particular year. A good bulk of that is in the Health and Human Services areas. But there is a lot of transactions that come through on a regular basis.
And currently, what portion of the requests are pre-approved? Is it most of them or very few of them?
I'd say over the past couple of years, we've gotten better. I mean, there was a huge learning curve with the implementation of the on-base system, and we've had some difficulties in terms of continuous upgrades to that and people's familiarity. I'd say right now we're probably in the area of about 70 to 80% of all the information being filed in advance.
Madam Chair, Director, where I'm going with this is we certainly welcome the increased accountability that this is going to provide, but are we confident that we have a system that's going to be efficient and easy to use and is not going to bog us down in a whole lot of additional paperwork and requirements and processing time, and et cetera?
Mr. Miller, I think that the system is functionally operative now to the point that everybody can negotiate it. Hopefully, as I said, we can incorporate some of these changes into the ERP when we get that far. But I think the system as it exists today and our ability to help any departments with putting their requests in is sufficient at this point in time to not be overly bureaucratic or to run a potential delay for anybody.
Are some of the changes that are being codified here already in practice?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Councilman Miller. Councilwoman Conwell.
Through the chair to director, for the grant paid travel, will it still be scrutinized in the same manner?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess the one question I would have to follow up to Councilman Miller is the concern with Children and Family Services is just, I know they have reporting mechanisms in place where they have to identify their mileage for when we're traveling to do review for property and safety measures. Is this going to, this will not hinder that process because essentially they cannot plan for that in advance. So will their current system be modified along with this travel policy, or will they be able to operate in the same fashion?
Madam Chair, I don't think that this policy is going to complicate any of their reporting. That the purpose of the majority of the policy is to get prior approvals so that we can make sure, even from a budgetary standpoint, that the funds exist. But I don't think it's, as I said, I don't think it's going to be cumbersome or bureaucratic from an HHS perspective.
And that is I think a fair concern, and maybe our staff can also speak to that just to quell any concerns relative to that. But as we look to improve those processes in Children and Family Services Department, certainly don't want to bind them any further or bog them down with any more processes that would prevent them from executing safety measures for our children.
I would agree, and as I said, we will extend all our assistance on the side of the fiscal office to help anybody negotiate the system, put in the correct information, and if it is an emergency, we will take that into account and make sure that everything is scrutinized. What we're trying to eliminate is things that aren't emergencies, that don't come in because the appropriate steps weren't taken by either the department head or the person that is proposing to travel.
Okay, thank you very much. Continue.
Couple of other items right now. In-state, in the proposed policy it exists, in-state travel requests for over $1,000 or any out-of-state requests would have to be approved by the fiscal office in advance. The biggest change that the employees will recognize, and I believe it will be fairly well received, is that we are now going to tie the mileage reimbursement rate to the current IRS reimbursement rate. The prior policy, as I said, was effective in 2007, and that had basically codified the reimbursement rate at whatever it was in 2007. So this is going to be a pretty substantial jump in terms of the dollar amounts that employees are reimbursed. It was probably not fair to those folks at that particular point in time. There will be a cost to that. We don't think it'll be overwhelming. As I said, we have a little difficulty in specifically identifying that cost because of the limitations of the accounting system. My best guesstimate at this point would be roughly in the area of an additional $100,000 a year because of the jump in the mileage. But I think it's a something that needs to be done. It's fair to the employees, and the mileage is based on, again, that's if you're using your personal vehicle. Mileage rates that are calculated by the IRS include the wear and tear in your vehicle and depreciation. So to be applying those principles at a 2007 level to our employees is probably not the fairest thing in the world. So this will change that and bump that amount up for the employees. So I do think that'll be well received by the folks that use their own vehicles to conduct county business. And finally, this policy also addresses memberships and sponsorships. Those are going to have to go through a process similar to the travel and training. Our office will approve all requested memberships that are put through the system, but we do have the option based on any types of questions or level of expense to request that the department head submit those through the Board of Control for approval. And those are really the highlights of the changes from the current policy, so I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you. I think Councilwoman Conwell had a question, and then Councilman Miller. Councilman Miller.
Through the chair to the director, parking tickets, if they're in their line of duty, are we paying those the parking tickets? So say an employee chooses not to go into a parking garage and they park on the street, are we responsible for those parking tickets if they're doing county business?
If they're, Ms. Conwell, you're saying if they're cited by law enforcement for, no, we do not pay the parking tickets.
Thank you.
Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair, Director, I know that that a new substitute on this legislation has been prepared, and my question is whether you're able to say on behalf of the administration that you've reviewed and approved the changes, or does the administration need time to review the changes that are in the new substitute?
Mr. Miller, I just want to make sure, is the proposed substitute to be introduced next Tuesday? I mean, we would have time to review that before then.
My understand, we have a substitute that may be put forward at this meeting today, and my question is whether the administration wants us to move forward on the legislation with the substitute today, or whether you want us to provide time for you to review the substitute before we put it into the legislation.
Mr. Miller, I have not seen the specific language. I know I've talked to the staff about what the proposed changes could be, but I haven't seen the actual language. I think we would be comfortable with moving forward through this process. I'd really like to get this travel policy adopted so we get the audit citation removed. So I think we can work things out between now and Tuesday if that situation needs to be worked out.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. And then I think our staff has some additional remarks relative to the travel policy. So we'll ask them to come forward before we make any motions.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Trevor Mackler, County Council staff.
Michael King, council staff.
Before we get into the proposed substitute, if I could address a couple of the questions that were asked to the fiscal officer, that I think that might be helpful for you to, in your decision-making of how we're going to proceed today. First, on page 6 of the current policy, and it sticks in the proposed substitute, any mandated travel, so for social workers that have to visit houses, et cetera, that does not require approval. So it's the current process that they have to deal with. They'll have to submit the necessary documentation, but it doesn't require pre-approval because that's in their duty-related travel. We're not talking about conferences or seminars or out-of-state travel. It's in their daily duty as a social worker or as a sheriff's deputy. So I wanted to address that one. Councilwoman Conwell, you asked the question about the airfare, of how the airfare will get selected. I just wanted to let you know in our proposed substitute, which we'll go into a little greater detail here shortly, but any travel regarding airfare would require Board of Control approval under our proposed substitute that we have for the committee today. So it would be on an agenda, every Thursday when you receive the Board of Control agenda. That's a new policy that we are proposing, but any travel involving airfare would be on a Board of Control agenda for Board of Control consideration.
Is that a specific dollar amount?
No, it would be any
No matter
travel
what.
regarding airfare. There's some other requirements around there which we'll get into, but I just wanted to address that.
Can you speak to just in general how council is impacted by the travel? I know many times we err on the side of caution so that we don't even give the appearance of having done anything improper. Has the language been updated in a way that reflects what is appropriate for an elected official to travel?
So I would say, Councilman Jones, I think the current version that's in front of you for consideration, as well as the proposed substitute, certainly creates more transparency and accountability than the travel policy in 2007. It's just an updated, it's 11 years old. So I believe the both versions that are in front of you provides greater transparency. Council members, per the charter, are eligible for reimbursement for travel with, related duty expenses. As you know, though, we've discussed this with pretty much all the members. Council members have not traveled significantly. They haven't requested many reimbursements. It's probably less than $100 combined over the 7-year period. So there's just not a lot of requests for reimbursements, but council members and the county executive are eligible for reimbursements per the charter.
Sorry.
Right here.
And by the terms of this policy, it does apply to not only employees, but also officials and board members who travel to conduct county business. So this would apply to elected officials as well.
And to your point, Trevor, I think that's how council has intentionally operated. Do you see this more clear language, again, creating an environment within council where appropriate travel might take place? That before, and I'm just going to use myself, I saw the rules as being vague, and I didn't want to do anything that was improper. Do you think we should change our culture? Has this provided any firm or clear picture of what would be appropriate for a council person to travel?
I think the updated travel policy provides more guidance than maybe what's been out there in the past under the previous policy. I think if it's county related, county specific to being in your position, I think that travel reimbursements are more than fair and allowed both under this policy and under the charter. That was considered when the crafters of the charter put it together. They specifically said any county-related activities, the council members and the county executive are eligible for reimbursement.
Okay, thank you.
And the last point from the discussion with the fiscal officer, to Councilman Miller's question, received a message from the internal auditor who can get you a report related to how much has been spent on travel. So he said he would prepare a report for you and get it to the committee. So just to add a little bit to what Fiscal Officer Kennedy said related to council staff working with him and his staff over the past year, this actually, I would say, dates back to the previous administration where we were trying to get an updated travel policy in front of council, considering it had, county commissioners and the old logo and everything related to the 2007 document. We were working with Sharon Cole, if everyone remembers Sharon Cole, on the travel policy, and she left and it kind of stalled in the process. So we have been working pretty extensively with the new fiscal officer here to get an updated policy for two reasons. One, to Councilman Jones's point, to provide clearer guidance, I think, for the county employees, but also to address some of the concerns that are mentioned in the audit, as well as our internal auditors conducting a travel reimbursement audit. He's not completed the audit yet, but we know some of the areas where he's, certain findings that he has and some recommendations, which is really the basis for some of the changes that we have in our proposed substitute that we know will address what is in his internal audit findings that should be released here in the next 6 weeks or so. So I don't have an exact date, but I know he's trying to finalize that audit right now. So if it's okay, Chairwoman, if we can just go over the changes, not significant, I don't think it'll take too long. So if we can just flip through the pages just so everyone can follow along and know exactly what we're changing. So on page 2 of the proposed substitute, we're going off the document that has proposed substitute on the header. What we did here, and I know this committee knows this very well, but at the same time that we were working on the travel policy, we were also working on the updated human resources policies and procedures. So this version of the travel policy had some exhibits, which you can see at the last couple pages of the document, but had exhibits from the previous version of the travel policy before council adopted the new one last Tuesday.
HR policy.
HR policy, thank you. So what we did here is we actually incorporated, because the new HR policy that council approved last week took out some language related to travel because we knew we were updating the travel policy around the same time. So that section there on page 2, starting with county employees, that is language from the previous HR manual that was taken out of the new HR manual because we were going to insert this in the travel policy. So it's not new language, it's existing there, and county employees are aware of that language because it is under the previous HR policy and procedures manual. But we inserted that here on page 2, so it's in the travel policy because it's travel related.
And there are a number of additions to this, to the proposed substitute that basically just do that same thing. They're taking current policies in the old HR policy manual and inserting them into the travel policy where they're probably more appropriate because they only really relate to travel.
Also there on page 2, you can see we took that last sentence out of the now third paragraph. Upon written request, the fiscal officer, county executive, or designee may grant exceptions to this policy or his or her discretion, at his or her discretion. That's very similar to the language that council took out on the HR policy and procedures manual. We referred to it as executive
Management rights.
Management
Yeah.
rights. So similar to what we did with the HR policy manual, we did take that line out. So it's clear and stays consistent with what council did for the HR policy and procedure manual. On page 3, under section 3B, request for travel, we did add a sentence there that certain travel will require Board of Control approval, which we're going to get into shortly. But we just wanted to add a section so the employee who's reading the travel policy will know that certain travel will require Board of Control approval, excuse me. On page 5, it's a minor change there. It could be any map printouts. It didn't need to be MapQuest, so we just made that. It's a minor change, so we change that. On page 10, for in-state travel, as you know, the travel policy is broken up by in-county, in-state, out-of-state, and then international travel. We added that any in-state travel requiring airfare would require Board of Control approval. It should be very limited, if non-existent, but just in case there is any travel in-state that would require airfare, that would have to go to Board of Control, regardless of dollar amount. On page 11, the approval requirements for the out-of-state travel, what we did here is any out-of-state travel under $500 would require the approval of the fiscal officer. Anything $500 or more, or any travel that would require airfare, regardless of the dollar amount, would go to the Board of Control for approval. And the reason why the $500 threshold is in case there was an employee that had to drive to Erie, Pennsylvania, for example, where it might be $180 worth of reimbursements just for mileage, didn't stay the night or something, that wouldn't necessarily require Board of Control approval, but the fiscal officer or his designee could approve that. Then on page 12, any international travel, regardless of dollar amount, would go to Board of Control for approval. That would more than likely be above $500 anyway, but any international travel would require Board of Control approval. Page 13 and 14 there, it looks like a lot of changes, but that again, the first goes along with the first change that we had. This is language from the old HR manual that we took out and wanted to include.
Page 13?
Page 13 and 14, Councilman. We wanted to include this language. It's language that employees, again, are familiar with. We wanted to include that in the travel policy because that was taken out of the new HR policy manual. The language is the same. It's not new language. Page 15, the two changes there are also two things that were taken from the old HR manual that is not in the new HR manual because we were going to incorporate it in the travel policy.
One question through the chair to Trevor. For the HR policy, employees are required to sign. Since you've removed some of the things that were originally in the HR policy, will they be mandated to sign the travel policy as well? Whether they, just to make sure they're aware of the new policy, whether they drive or not?
So I don't believe there's a requirement that the employees sign the acknowledgement that they've read the travel policy, but the new HR policy manual incorporates by reference the travel policy. So it basically says that in the new HR policy manual, while it doesn't spell out all the requirements, it does say that when traveling on county businesses, county employees have to abide by the new travel policy that will be adopted. So even though they're not signing off on this policy in this format, they are by reference effectively agreeing to abide by this travel policy.
They're expected to know it?
Yes.
And so will the travel policy be put on the website, on the HR?
Yes, it'll be on the My HR website. And we can also request that HR do what they're doing related to the updated HR policies and procedures manual, do similar to that at the same time, hopefully, with the travel policy.
That would be my request.
Okay.
Thank you.
On page 18, section C there, it's, again, language that came out of the HR policy manual, the old HR policy manual that incorporated into the personal vehicle section of the travel policy. It's not new language, but it's language that we knew we were taking out of the the old HR policy manual because we were going to include it in the travel policy. The last change is on page 22 under section VC. What this here requires that any employee seeking reimbursement for college degrees would require a Board of Control approval. Continuing education like CLEs would not require a Board of Control approval, but any request for degrees from a university or college, it would require a Board of Control approval.
and the thought process behind this here is that if you are, if you're going to some type of educational training, workshop, or doing continuing education in order to maintain or train for your current position, that be something that, that doesn't require some type of special approval from the Board of Control, but that if you're going to seek an advanced degree or for some type of training that would be more about your professional career advancement and less about your training for your immediate job duties, that go to Board of Control for approval, because it's above and beyond what is necessary for the employee to do their job.
And the final technical change on page 25 and the corresponding exhibits, we removed Exhibit 3, travel, driving on county business, because that is the language that we incorporated into the manual that we talked about. So if you go to example page 28, and the next 5 or so pages after that, this is the language that was included in the old HR policy manual, that we removed in the new policy manual, but incorporated into this travel policy. So that's why we're taking this out, because we incorporated the language from the exhibit into the actual policy. And if I may, just as follow-up from when we say Board of Control approval, what we would request that OPD and the fiscal officer does, it would be presented as a travel consent agenda where it's on the Board of Control approval, but it would not be listed under each specific travel request. You would see it line by line, but it would be treated as a travel consent agenda. So it wouldn't extend the Board of Control meetings for another 20 to 30 minutes discussing each travel or voting on each travel item, but it would be considered under the travel consent agenda.
One other important point to note that relates to emergency travel. If there is a bona fide emergency that requires somebody to travel in some fashion, say it involves airfare, that would normally require Board of Control approval, emergency travel basically can be approved by the fiscal officer after the fact without Board of Control approval, knowing that Board of Control meets once a week and that you may not have that lead time in order to get something on an agenda and have it approved before the travel takes place. So in bona fide emergencies, it may not require Board of Control approval, but in all other instances, airfare and the travel, as we've specified, will be on the Board of Control.
Thank you, Councilwoman Conwell. Did you have a question?
Through the chair to Trevor, I suppose that you're done. I wanted to go back to that mandated travel duty. You said not required pre-approval.
On page 6?
Yeah, so how are we gonna keep an oversight over those things?
So that would be through the reimbursement process, Councilwoman, where the fiscal officer and his staff, they do process the reimbursement. So there will be the review process there to make sure all of the necessary supporting documentation is included in the reimbursement request. So if, for example, a social worker requested 700 miles worth of reimbursement, it will have to show where the social worker traveled from each location to back up the supporting documentation. You will see once the travel reimbursement audit is completed by the internal auditor that there were some reimbursements that didn't necessarily have all the supporting documentation. So even though it doesn't require pre-approval, it still requires all the supporting documentation to be attached to the reimbursement request. If it's not, then the fiscal officer has the ability to either reject the request or send back the request and say, we cannot process the reimbursement until you provide the supporting documentation as outlined in this travel policy.
Well, I thought it was given only 30 days to get those things in order.
Correct, you have to submit it in a timely manner.
Okay, so my concern, I think this was a section when the auditor dinged us, so to speak, really came from, a lot of them came from that area. So I just wanted to make sure that in going forward, that we're trying not to get dinged by the auditor.
I believe, Councilwoman, that this new policy will allow that from happening in the future.
And then one other thing, probably Mike can answer, what constitutes an emergency travel?
Let me pull that up. I believe it's on page 12. So the way it's being defined is that if a traveler is unable to secure the approvals required due to unforeseen or extenuating circumstances, the county traveler may request approval after the expenses have been incurred. Again, it's important to note that when emergency travel takes place, particularly in instances where the employee is required to basically pay for it up front, it's at their risk on the back end. So if it turns out to not have been a bona fide emergency, then the fiscal officer still has the ability to reject a reimbursement or deny a reimbursement if it turns out that those circumstances weren't valid. So in that case, again, that control is there, similar to what Trevor had just been talking about. And so again, you can't always foresee unforeseen circumstances. You're going to have situations that you can't necessarily spell out, but I think in most instances, it's going to be clear whether something is considered emergency travel or not. I would say in almost every instance relating to a conference or a training or something like that, it's not going to be considered emergency travel. You're really talking about those instances where there's where time is of the essence, or there's a public health or safety need that requires travel to take place before it can go through the normal approval process.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Miller?
On that point, do we have any requirement in the legislation that the fiscal officer keep a log of emergency travel that's approved? And if so, would you recommend that, or is that there some other way that this information could be accessed?
Sure. So there's no explicit requirement that a log of emergency travel be maintained, but through our on-base system, and I'm sure if we change systems as part of the ERP, all travel, both emergency and non-emergency, that are approved by the fiscal officer are logged in that system and will be, auditable and reportable. So.
Under that system, how easy or difficult would it be to take a look at just the emergency travel?
I would have to defer maybe to the fiscal officer on that, or whoever's developing the new software system. I believe it can be flagged and separated out, but I'll turn it over to Dennis.
Thank you. Councilman, the current system that we use, the on-base system, we can program that to some degree to segregate or separate emergency travel. We are right now, as I said, contemplating how we're going to design the expense management system in the ERP system, so I'm not so much worried about it there, but I think we could share with the staff on a regular basis anything that constitutes a submission under an emergency provision that bypassed any part of the process because of the emergency, so we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, well, I'm not going to worry greatly about the legacy system. I would just express the request to make sure that the new system provides the capability to easily segregate emergency travel so that we can look at it if we want to.
We will.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are there any other questions, comments, or concerns from the committee? Guys, is it your recommendation that we move this forward, given the time and the length that this has been somewhat in limbo, respectfully, for lack of a better expression?
Second.
Madam Chair, I would request as a staff member that we've been trying to get a new travel policy adopted for 7+ years under the new government. Considering the recent audit findings, right, both internal audit in the state, I would also request, if possible, the proposed substitute could be adopted and recommended for second reading adoption.
All right, well, I've made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, are there any questions, comments, or concerns? Councilman Miller?
So, am I correct, the motion on the floor is to substitute?
Yes.
Okay.
So we made the motion to substitute. Are there any further questions, comments, or concerns, Councilman Miller? All in favor of the proposed substitute, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all right. And I'll make a motion that we move this forward to the full body of the council under second reading suspension under the proposed substitute. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved in second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, thank you, everyone. We have public comment unrelated to the agenda.
Yes, Reverend Pinckney.
All right.
Thank you, first of all, thanks. And thank you for that support for the clergy, also, for that committee. I came today because the Holy Spirit touched my heart this morning as it relates to you all. And listening to your presentations today, it was no more than a confirmation. There's a big misunderstanding with my name on it as it relates to you all. And I came today to try to clear that up. In your presentation that you just did with the people for your travel, I don't know the gentleman's name, but I went to speak to him. And David Merriman and Cynthia Weiskittle could use what they just told you to clear up our misunderstandings, because there are some caseworkers who have broken the law. And Prosecutor O'Malley and Sheriff Pinckney can help you do that. I first started speaking publicly after having my teeth pulled to get me to do it by God and as well as family members, because I wasn't going to do it, as a result of my concern for race relations as well as religious freedom. And I lost everything as a result of my faith in Jesus Christ. And I came today, and your spirit is just really sweet. It really is, Councilwoman. And in respect to all the other committee, when I filed my lawsuits, the people who I'm suing know who they are. The defendants know who they are. And they've caused an upheaval everywhere, through the chair to Councilman Gallagher. And they've caused you all to fear me. And there's no need to be afraid of me. I've been suing some people, and Judge Donald C. Nugent in the federal court knows who they are, as well as Judge Kathleen Ann Satula. And I want this to stop. This is not who I am. This is not what I do. My dad was the first person to run against Raymond J. Grabo for mayor before Marcia Fudge or any of those other people have been there. And my mom was Stephanie's chief of staff before Stephanie died. I don't do dishonest things. And you will never see me anywhere speaking publicly when I fled here from Ohio to Indiana with my 4 children, angry, threatening anybody, harming anybody, or doing anything bad. I've never done that. I don't do that. That's not how I operate. And I don't know how you have to go about terminating the employment of some people, but you're going to have to do it. And they're going to have to be prosecuted because they've stolen money from the government in not only travel expenses, but they've caused you all and caused us all some great embarrassment. And I came to make peace. I'm not into all this police chasing me around. I'm not into all that. And I just wanted to tell you that. And Mr. Gallagher, I heard the bell, but I wanted to tell you, I know that you gave me the solution that you did know, which is best. But the reason that was is because people are giving misinformation about me out here. And I do have documentation to support that. Thank you very much. Thank you for welcoming my opportunity to speak. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming before us. Is there any miscellaneous business? I failed to bring that up. Any miscellaneous business? All right, there being none, we will adjourn. We stand adjourned. Thank you so much.